Does Miles need any introduction? Our great board member here. We love Miles.
All right,
Miles is a critical.
All right, Dr. Mona, we need you again.
Dr. Mona.
There's no
calling Dr.
paging
Mona.
Dr. Mona.
We need you on this panel
Mindy,
here.
Mona, Janie, Katie, Linda, come on up here. Everybody get seated. And I'll tell you what, while everybody's getting seated, let's just pick up with Dr. Mona, because I'm fascinated by the fact that, because scientists, especially these days, run this quandary of how much of a public advocacy role they should be playing versus just releasing their papers, waiting for the peer review process, and the chips fall where they may. How you were kind of hanging out there on a limb when you did that news conference without any peer review, and yet you did it, and you were vilified for it. How nervous did that make you? Did you ever doubt your decision? Did you feel like you weren't on firm scientific ground?
Sure. So one of the repercussions of this work have been incredible, and all these different accolades. And my favorite award has been a disobedience award that I received from MIT, specifically because of that academic disobedience. So it was a no-no. It was an academic no-no to release this research without the peer review process. And as you read in the book, my university wasn't even that behind me initially because I did it without going through the proper channels. But that's the message of my story and the message of this book. And I was one of the co-chairs of the March for Science with Bill Nye, which was amazing. But it is a lesson that I hope to share, that doctors and scientists and academics, we live in cozy spaces. We are very comfortable in our ivory towers and our classrooms and our hospitals and our clinics, and we need to get out. And we need to work hand in hand with our communities because it never should have taken my research to kind of unravel this crisis. It should have stopped when that first mom raised a jug of brown water and said something is wrong with my water and my children. But when the voice of science spoke, when the person with a bunch of titles after her name said something, finally something happened. So academics have this credible voice in their communities, and communities are yearning to hear those voices. So my hope is that people get out of their comfort spaces and work hand in hand with communities to try to elevate these issues very much in partnership. But yeah, it was hard, and I was vilified, and I doubted myself. I'm like, I'm probably wrong. But then really the science backed me up.
Yeah, it's tough when the governor singles you out, though.
Yeah, absolutely. When every arm of the state tells you you're wrong, it's hard not to think you're wrong. But then, it was also the recognition. A lot of us live in the world of numbers and spreadsheets and research. It was a quick recognition that these weren't just numbers. These were children. These were children that, as a doctor, I've taken an oath to protect, and I will continue to fight for those kids. So a lot of us get lost in numbers, and we have to kind of, what do they represent, and what are you willing to risk for those numbers?
Okay, so now that we've just sort of eased our way, we've segued into our afternoon panel on chemicals. And we've got the 5 horsemen of the chemical apocalypse right here to talk about this. Janie Heath right here, right next to me, is going to talk about nicotine, e-cigarettes. Katie Hovath, I'm going out of order. Mindy Mesmer in New Hampshire, who has been active crusading in the issue of PFAS. Katie in the Great Lakes, PFAS as well. Linda Reinstein to talk to us about asbestos, which, believe it or not, folks, still is not banned in this country. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump is very pro-asbestos, if that's possible. And more cancer. Let's have more cancer. The More Cancer Organization. And then, of course, we don't need to reintroduce Dr. Mona. So here's what I want to talk about, Mindy. Let's start with you, and maybe there could be a little interchange, kind of lessons learned with Mona. Why the PFA issue, which you have been focused on specifically in the seacoast area of New Hampshire, right around the old Pease Air Force Base. In some respects, this PFA issue, correct me if I'm wrong, seems to be a burgeoning issue which could rival lead as a contaminant concern, public health concern. Would you say that's true? And to what extent is the regulatory, political, scientific reaction somewhat different in the case of PFAS versus lead?
Well, like lead, PFAS in your water is not detectable by you. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, so it's invisible to you. And the thing about it is that it does accumulate in your body and it accumulates in the environment. So it's very difficult to get out, and that's similar to lead. And it does, we think, cause similar effects now that lead has had. And it is been decades known that these chemicals have caused lots of different public health outcomes and cancers and other effects. But the industry has been very helpful in keeping that information at bay from us. And they've got lobbyists and people in the EPA and people in the Department of Defense who have also helped keep this secret for decades. So it's very discouraging when you hear about that. We know that the EPA now has, we talked earlier today about some people at the helm who are very, former lobbyists, former industry people who are saying that, we don't want to regulate these chemicals. But what has happened is, in the meantime, 4,000 plus of these PFAS chemicals have been put on the market with very minimal to no health information provided to support their putting them on the market. And so now we're basically becoming the human guinea pigs for this experiment. There's only 2 of them, that there are health advisories on the EPA level about just health advisories, and that's similar to lead, actually. Lead only has a health advisory as well. The EPA has been very, very slow to create what's called these maximum contaminant levels that are the enforceable criteria for what you can drink in your water. And that's very frustrating, and that's something I've been trying to work at the state level to try to make the states become more proactive when we're really at loss with the EPA for doing so.
So, Katie, you've gotten involved in this issue as you look at from the legal perspective. You are a lawyer, after all, and are very concerned about the Great Lakes, as you see it outside your window every day. I am curious, is part of this problem how we think about water? Do we take it for granted? Do we need to treat it more as a public asset, public resource that should be protected at all costs? And why don't we do that already?
Exactly. So, I come from an area of water wealth, if we look at water as a currency. The Great Lakes being, as Mona mentioned earlier, 20% of the world's fresh water. Well, if you look at groundwater in our region, in the Great Lakes Basin, the volume of groundwater is equal to Lake Huron. So really, it's the 6th Great Lake. And so when I'm talking about groundwater issues in Michigan or in the Great Lakes, really this is an issue for our entire country and our entire world. And one of the purposes of me being here, in addition to learning and spreading the word on the science that goes into the chemicals being a problem and leading to cancer and other issues, is I want to provide a solution for everybody. And the solution that my group, Flow for Love of Water, advocates for is called the Public Trust Doctrine. It's from ancient Rome, Miles, and so this is something that has been available to the public for many, many years. The idea is that no one person can make use of water that interferes with the public's right to use and enjoy its resource. That the navigable waters are held in trust for the public. They're the public that owns them. And the government has a fiduciary duty to act as steward for this resource for now and for future generations. And so this is a solution that I want to offer to everybody listening across the country and across the world. Take it into your local communities. Get your water declared public commons, and in that sense, have them be subject to this wonderful doctrine dating back to ancient Rome.
And the opposition to this is what? Agriculture? What is it? Who says no to this idea?
Well, I think that technically, usually it's commerce. Different companies, states, or federal legislation that doesn't happen. This is a common law idea, and really what we're trying to do is give people a framework for regulations and rules that can be taken down to the community level, to zoning boards, land use, water uses as you're looking toward future use, but also help dictate cleanup.
It's interesting. I think a common theme through all of these stories that you guys are going to talk about is there's this huge tide of anti-science sentiment in this country, this huge anti-regulatory sentiment, which goes back to the Reagan days. It's funny, guaranteed applause line in the State of the Union, we're going to cut regulations. Well, wait a minute, there's a reason for those regulations. I'd like to know a little bit about what you're cutting first. And then ultimately, what we're talking about here in each of these cases, it's just the honest-to-goodness statement in this country is we are anti-children. We are not protecting our children. How can the world's most richest, most powerful democracy sleep at night knowing that we're not putting children foremost? And that brings me to vaping, e-cigarettes. So, Janie, first of all, let's talk about the science. Let's be pro-science for a moment. The spin that you get is that these things at the bottom of the ledger are better because it weans them off of cigarettes, which are worse than e-cigarettes and vaping. What's the real truth? What are the studies showing us now? Is it encouraging more youthful engagement with nicotine? Is it a gateway to worse things? Or are we at the bottom of the ledger doing better having these as opposed to cigarettes?
So let's just think about this a little bit about the science. And I'm looking over here because you guys know this so well. It is an epidemic. And unlike the lead and the other stories that you're hearing, you can see it. We saw it walking in the door into this building, someone juuling. We know what juuling looks like. We know what vaping looks like.
Help us understand the difference between juuling and vaping.
So with electronic cigarettes, we have the old generation, and those were the vaping pens, and the vapor just went everywhere, right? And they were flavored as well. You look at the Juuls that are so incredibly hot right now, and I refer to it as the little cigarette with a big hit. And the reason why I say that is we have science that talks about and tells us the nicotine levels. 1 cigarette, 1 milligram of nicotine. 1 pod in a Juul, we're talking, and when we look at smoking these Juuls, it's equivalent to smoking. That pod is like 1 pack of a cigarette that our youth are going into the restroom and they're consuming them during their little recess breaks and during their little bathroom breaks. 50 milligrams of nicotine compared to a pack that we know is 20 milligrams. If you smoke all of those cigarettes, it's 20 milligrams of nicotine. That's crazy. That's an epidemic. So the tobacco industry is smart. Their market has dried up for cigarettes. So now they're going out with the electronic cigarette devices. We know that there's over 500 devices on the market right now. They have different shapes and sizes, different colors. We also know that those flavors are up to over 7,000. And in those flavors, it's not the nicotine. The nicotine gets you addicted. So the juuling, the vaping, the attractiveness, the coolness of that sucks you in and draws you in. It's the nicotine that keeps you in. And it's the initiation of those electronic cigarettes that's going to lead to cigarette smoking, okay? So some of you may know a study came out a couple weeks ago in the New England Journal of Medicine saying that, look at our outcomes when we have a randomized clinical trial and we have patients that are put on nicotine replacement therapy, a patch, and provided behavioral counseling because we do look at tackling tobacco dependence comprehensively. And then we have an arm that are on getting behavioral counseling too and electronic cigarettes. Well, they came out with all these rave reviews like, whoopee, look at this. Electronic cigarette users to quit 1 year out, 18% success rate. Those that were on the patch were 8% success rate. But yet, that's one study, a little over 800 individuals. So we have decades of studies showing those success rates with nicotine replacement therapy double. And that was just one. That was the patch. And we've got 7 first-line drugs to help patients quit. So you probably can hear the passion in my voice. I'm very concerned about it. I also refer to this, we are creating a generation of what's called the popcorn lung generation. Because one of those chemicals in Juuls, in the electronic cigarettes, is called diacetyl. And that leads to getting the inflammation at the very bottom of our lungs where you get bronchiolitis obliterans. So it is messed up lungs. So let's take a look at some of those studies long term. The other chemical I'm real concerned about in our electronic cigarettes is diethylene glycol. That's antifreeze. That's going in the body. And then it's also going out. So others are being exposed to that as well. So it's an epidemic, and the tobacco industry, they are just some, I guess the president called people bad guys coyotes. Maybe I can get away with calling them.
Some bad hombres.
The tobacco coyotes are on it. Right now, we're looking at a 70% profit margin for Juul's Labs. It's huge. And it's also predicted by 2023, it's going to be a $28 billion profit for those that are in the Juul business, electronic, and that's throughout the world with electronic cigarettes. So it's scary stuff.
And it should be pointed out, the folks who gave us Joe Camel are now selling Fruit Loop flavored stuff. So they're not aiming at kids at all.
Right.
No, not at all. So where are the regulations? Where is the FDA? We keep waiting for the FDA to do something on this, and it doesn't seem to happen.
So I think it was actually our student that brought up that Hanna-Attisha, the EPA, awarded a D-. So the American Lung Association awarded the FDA a flat-out F for the lack of regulation. And they have the power and the authority. Pull them off the shelves, okay, number one. Raise the age limit, number two. And number three, get the flavorings out of these things, as well as menthol out of cigarettes too. So the FDA has that authority. Now, our leadership, the commissioner of FDA, Scott Gottlieb, and I have a lot of confidence in him as a physician, scientist, but also he is a cancer survivor. And if you look at what he's done in the past couple of years, he's on it. So it's going to, I really feel like if it's going to start clamping down, it's going to start clamping down with his leadership. So I feel like we're going to get some stronger regulation coming forward.
You should whisper that so the Trump administration doesn't find that out.
Okay.
So I would say the poster child of regulatory inaction has to be asbestos. 50 years ago, we decided this is a bad thing. The guys with the moon suits come out, and today it is still not banned. It's the poster child for the failure of the TSCA subset of EPA, the Toxic Substances Control Act. Linda Reinstein, who is an advocate on behalf of regulation, of course, when it comes to asbestos, and who lost her husband to mesothelioma, one of the diseases caused by asbestos, is tirelessly fighting on behalf of change in this. And yet what we have now is, and always follow the money, folks. Who are the two big manufacturers of asbestos, miners manufacturers in the world? Russia and Brazil. So our president's friend, Pooty, has got this, is dying to ship asbestos here. Matter of fact, they have pallets of asbestos with Trump's picture on it, literally saying this is approved by Donald Trump. We're very happy to be shipping it to you. This is really happening, folks. And what at this point, Linda, you've been fighting for so long, you got to be frustrated. Do you see anything changing?
Yes, sir. I want to first touch on a little bit of background. Nearly 40,000 Americans die every year of a preventable asbestos-caused disease, and imports continue. And not just a little bit of imports, it's hundreds of tons of asbestos come in every year for one industry, the chlor-alkali industry. So what we've seen over the last 15 years since I started my work, and not to be political, but it is, Trump's administration, especially the EPA, have allowed rollbacks of regulations and inaction to really take charge. So as hard as we work to stop the imports, to ban the use, we are faced with industry propaganda and doubt and bad science, we call that junk science, to really say that a little bit of asbestos isn't a problem. Don't worry about chrysotile, that's the one that comes from Russia. And of course, we have safe and controlled use. If you believe any of those three things, then we're going to have a little sit down with your professor at the end of this, because it's all just a lie. I think what Mona said also, though, is we have to become comfortable being a sort of disruptor. If you take the science as written, as verbatim, and God's truth, you will lose. So we talk about cancer prevention, and you usually think it's eating well, don't text and drive, don't drink. Well, now we have to be worried, all of you do, about chemical exposure. What chemicals are carcinogen? How do you limit that exposure? And it's very hard with asbestos, Miles, as you pointed out, because we've been the poster child. But how many in this room thought asbestos was banned? Mm-hmm. Come on, you guys can be honest. Fair. How many of you have ever seen asbestos in your home, school, or workplace? Very few. So as I remind Congress, no one can really identify asbestos or manage the risk. What we face now is a very troubling EPA, but I'm quite pleased to tell you earlier this morning, we are working on another ban asbestos bill that'll be introduced in about 10 days, and it's stronger and better than the rest, and the industry will hate it.
All right, this is how many? Good. By the way, round of applause for that. You're still pushing on that one. You're not taking no for an answer, and we do appreciate that. But what? First of all, how many attempts have there been now over the years on asbestos? Quite a few. I can't lost track.
Yeah, well, if you count TSCA reform
Yeah.
in 76, the EPA should have already banned it, which they tried in 89. It was overturned. And since 89, there have been about 10 asbestos ban bills that failed. And it's seen as Republicans versus Democrats, which is untrue. Yeah. So we need to break out of our silos and recognize it's a public health crisis, not a political issue.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump is on record as saying this was the mob that actually pushed this because the mob was getting the money for the remediation, and also that the World Trade Centers would still be standing if only they had coated those girders with asbestos. I can't make this up, people.
No, I encourage them to come to the website and read about this because it's actually shocking, and someone will probably write a paper and get a wonderful grade from it because it's really what you can't believe what's happening.
All right, so we have 10 minutes. I'm available for your questions. If you want to raise your hand, I'll head over to you. And while I'm headed over there, I'm going to ask you, Mona. I grew up in the mean streets of Grosse Pointe, Michigan.
Totally
tough
mean
place.
streets.
Yeah,
Totally
I don't know
mean.
how we got along out there, but we managed.
You're lucky you turned
but
out
you know, it's
okay.
funny when they talk about austerity programs. The austerity programs never affect Grosse Pointe. It's always Flint.
No.
So why can't they
Moore,
shift it over to Grosse Pointe where they can afford some Evian?
Seriously.
You know?
So Michael Moore, who's from Flint, said that this never would have happened, the Flint water crisis, if it was in Grosse Pointe or Bloomfield Hills. So in a richer, wider community, it never would have happened. And now there's been many investigations and different reports, including from the Michigan Civil Rights Commission, that clearly point to the demographics of the population, that this was also very much a race issue.
Absolutely. All right, go ahead. Question.
So I asked a question about vaping earlier, so I'm just going to rephrase it, I guess, in a way. So recently, Altria bought about 30% of the shares of Juul, estimating their value to be $38 billion, and I don't know why I know that off the top of my head.
Because you're in Charlottesville, Virginia. You got your buddies right there in Richmond, Virginia. There you go.
I grew up in Richmond, where Altria bought everything I love.
Yeah, how do you like that name, Altria? Isn't that special?
Yeah.
You just had to get out of the Philip Morris language.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll keep this high road.
But I was just wondering, because for me growing up, cigarettes have always been bad. And that was after huge committees and research and all this stuff happening that I didn't see. Do you feel like there's some of the same pushback you got from tobacco companies? Are you seeing the same pushback for some of the research and some of the findings that are coming out about vaping?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And of course, you guys can get on YouTube and you will be shocked at what you learn and you see, especially around what's going on with juuling. And, they went to the Silicon Valley, meaning the big three tobacco industries, big three companies, because it's high tech. I mean, if you think about it, how we've gone from the vaping pen to something that can be hidden in your hand. And what we're seeing these kids are doing, this is in the middle of class, in front of their even professors, my beloved college students. Now, none of my nursing students we'll be having a conversation, but it's happening across the country at all of our campuses. Hold it like this, look like you're coughing, hello, and you're inhaling, and then you bend it down like you know how we got to cough in our sleeve, and that's where the vapor's going. And people aren't seeing this, but it's happening. So it's very high tech. So the tobacco industry, Altria, goes out to California to start negotiating a deal. I cannot tell you how proud I have been of some of the big high-techers that said, no thanks, we don't want to be engaged with this. And there really isn't, the science isn't there. It's just not there. Do we know that if you look at what we know today in terms of the amount of the chemicals, there's fewer chemicals in Juul or in your vape pen than there is in one cigarette, but there's varying degrees from one device to another and varying amounts of nicotine. And I treat patients, and I always recommend first-line FDA approved. So electronic cigarettes are not approved for tobacco cessation, for any kind of cessation at this point. And the concern is that we know that our adult smokers, they start picking up the habit at age 18. So if our youth are being drawn in with electronic cigarettes, what's their next thing? It's going to be the cigarettes. So to answer your question, it's a wild, wild west environment right now, and anything goes. But the latest report I've seen, there's been many, many high-tech companies are saying, no thanks, we don't want to be a part of that. But interesting YouTube interviews with the CEO of Juul's Lab. So go check her out for an interesting paper to write.
The old tobacco playbook. You know, it's interesting. You know, it's so interesting. You know, tobacco perfected this idea of injecting a little bit of well-paid-for science, shall we say? Yeah. And this has manifested itself in the way we view climate change. It has a ton to do with that anti-science bent that we've been talking about here. Anybody on the panel want to weigh in on what it's like going up against this corporate-funded, you know, thumb on the scale science? Because all they want to do is muddy the waters and delay. That's really the tactic. You know, the assumption is eventually they might lose, but you know, there's billions of dollars to be made in the interim. Any thoughts on how you go up against that? Anybody on the panel? Mona, you want to say something?
Just really quickly. So in my book, I take a lot of deep dives into history, and especially for the students, I talk about how tetraethyl lead got introduced. So they added lead in gasoline when we knew it was toxic, but because General Motors had a patent on it. So we talked a lot about everything is driven by profits. And they hired industry hacks, scientists, and there was this one guy named Kehoe who established something called the Kehoe paradigm and convinced the Surgeon General that, we'll only take the lead out of gasoline if you can prove harm. So that completely shifted the public health and medical community to go after, to prove harm rather than to do prevention work and to prevent harm.
The burden of proof should be in the other direction.
Exactly.
Why are we selling these electronic death sticks to kids and we don't even know what they're sucking in? It's crazy. It's insane.
And it continues and continues and continues. It's the same playbook for over a century.
And I can tell you, if you don't mind, I'm going to tag on behind Mona just real quick. The power is right there with you guys. If you think about what happened with the, what's the foundation, Tobacco Free here in Washington, D.C., Michael Matthews, the youth campaign, taking down big tobacco. It was those amazing commercials of youth knocking on the CEO's door with a bottle of urine saying, are you kidding me? You're putting this in our cigarettes? Okay, you know, we know 500,000 people die a year because of cigarettes. All right, we don't have the numbers yet on what that impact's going to look like with the future with electronic cigarettes. But based on our history, it's not looking good. So how about this, a knock on the doors to the CEO of Juul's Lab with antifreeze right there. Are you kidding me? You putting this in this? You know, these flash drives, really? Right, you can do it.
Miles, I just want to...
You want to add something? We got one question.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Quick one. It's all about money, power, and politics, and you cannot walk away from an obstacle thinking the challenge is too great. So I encourage you to be educated, and we do education, advocacy, and community support to mobilize and talk to lawmakers, but we're also very public and we share. And I think that's what's been a wonderful friendship for Bill and myself, is that we know we have common messages. So I think aligning yourself with other professionals that share that common mission, like Less Cancer and ADAO, is we together are more and can affect change. But it is very hard, and I have been subpoenaed by the industry. I've had my phone unlisted because I have been attacked on the phone. So they have so much money to use to promote asbestos. It's pathetic, it's criminal, and we're going to stand up against it. But the media matters, Miles. What the media writes about is important. How many of you have heard about talc being a carcinogen in Johnson & Johnson? Mm-hmm. Well, so that's a great concern, but that's not the biggest one. But at least the media is getting it out there.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that for a second. Sorry.
Yeah.
There's a great film called Merchants of Doubt that
Everybody
really
should see it here.
touches exactly on what Miles was talking about in terms of the model used to instill doubt to do with fake science. This has actually happened also in New Hampshire when I've been working on trying to regulate these PFAS compounds. We have a business and industry association that has taken out literally personal attacks on me across the media in the state. And they are the biggest customers of the BIA, are the biggest polluters in our state that are responsible for polluting the entire central portion of the state of New Hampshire. So, but one important thing is and Linda was talking about this, is, you know, we're all in this room, we all care about this stuff. When we step out, when people like Mona and myself step out, we've got to have each other's backs. And that's where you come in, and that's where this kind of a forum happens to educate everyone so that you can have our back. We all need to step out. You step out, we've got your back. So everybody work together and make sure we can fight against these people who really don't want to, you know, they want to instill doubt with these climate deniers and these science deniers, and really it affects our public health.
And Miles, if I may, my recommendation too is use creative problem solving. Attack it from many, many different angles. You know, we have this playbook of let's crowd the real science with junk science such that nobody listens to any science, such that now we talk about evidence-based science to try to distinguish what is true and real from fake.
As if it wasn't evidence-based before, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we look at PFAS, for example. The EPA is not dealing with it right now. So we tried to deal with it on the state level. Well, in Michigan in December, there was a law passed that says that no state environmental regulation may be more stricter than the federal regulation, which doesn't exist. So, okay, we tried the state angle. Well, let's go down and try local. Let's try our townships, our villages, passing laws and framework using the public trust doctrine to try to get around this. And I will say I was very encouraged this morning for all of the talk here at Congress about the new PFAS task force. Out of the bipartisan committee that has just been established, no less than 11 representatives from the state of Michigan are on this. If that doesn't speak volumes about the problem that we see in our water, and there are over 11,000 sites right now that our state is investigating for PFAS contamination, there's just a lot going on. So my recommendation for everybody in the room is think creatively, attack it from many different angles all at once.
I think we have time for one more question, right, Bill? Can we do one question? Make it a good one. This is it.
No, okay. Oh, no.
No pressure. We have to think about it now.
Hi, guys. You guys are awesome. Thank you for being part of this amazing village. So have each other's backs. I can't reiterate that.
She's adorable.
Okay. You briefly mentioned what asbestos is being used for. I missed it. Would you explain that now, what it's being used for?
And I encourage you to come to the website, ADAO-US, to learn more because it's kind of complicated. There's one industry. It's called the chlor-alkali industry, and that's another reason why this works is because most people have never heard of the industry, don't understand the process, so everybody walks away. They use asbestos in the diaphragm process of making chlorine and caustic soda. So again, how many people know about the process? They imported in 2018 almost 600 metric tons from January to October. Metric tons. And there are safer substitutes. It's economically viable. 60 other countries have banned asbestos, but we face a huge, powerful, well-funded industry that wants to continue. Thank you for your interest.
All right. I think we're out of questions and out of time. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, panel. Appreciate it.
Thank you.